The lowlands of eastern Prussia lay quiet under a bruised purple dawn, as if the very sky sensed the weight of history about to settle on the fields of Grunwald. Heavy dew glazed every blade of rye and trampled oat, silvering the earth where two mighty hosts had bivouacked within bow-shot of one another. To the south, campfires of the Polish crown and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania guttered in the pre-dawn murk, wreathing tents with wood smoke and the scent of boiling millet. Beyond a low rise to the north, neat rows of Teutonic order pavilions stood like a traveling fortress. White canvas stamped with black crosses, lances stacked, horses picketed, chapel bells sounding lauds for men who expected a clean, swift victory delivered by God's own armored hand. Yet, in the hush between first light and sunrise, destiny lingered unclaimed. The Baltic breeze carried only sighs of restless men and the creak of leather as riders tightened girths, each side privately rehearsing the legend it hoped the coming hours would secure. King Władysław II. Jagiełło sat his warhorse upon a knoll of sandy loam, watching the eastern sky blush. At 53, he was sinewy rather than frail, an aging hunter possessed of patience sharper than any blade on his hip. Though christened a decade earlier, the Lithuanian-born king retained the forest tact and quiet intuition of a pagan prince. All night, he had paced the lines, listening, not merely to captains' reports, but to the tremor of thousands of hearts. He heard the wary whispers of Polish knights anxious about Teutonic discipline, the clipped Lithuanian consonants of pagan converts stiffened by fear of betrayal, the rippling gutturals of Tatar light cavalry jesting about plunder. Across that mosaic of tongues, he sensed a single yearning, to break the mailed fist that for a century had clutched the Baltic like an iron gauntlet. Jagiełło's plan, conceived in candlelit councils, relied on timing, feints, and the stubborn force of terrain, but it also relied on each disparate cohort trusting the next. Only unity could bend the order's seasoned blade back upon itself. Grandmaster Ulrich von Jungingen, by contrast, woke certain of divine favor. His Order of the Hospital of St. Mary of the Germans in Jerusalem, simply the Teutonic Knights to friend and foe alike, had crushed rebellion from Courland to Samogitia, carving a monastic crusader state ruled by the sword. Discipline was their creed, shock cavalry their instrument. Ulrich believed the heterogeneous host facing him, Poles in surcoats striped with red and white, Lithuanians in quilted lamellar, Tatar horse archers in wolf fur hats, resembled a caravan, not a cohesive army. With methodical calm, he arranged his 8 heavy cavalry banners in the center, flanked by mercenary spearmen from Franconia and cohorts of crossbowmen under Burgundian captains. Behind them, he massed reserves, fresh knights with unblemished harness eager for martyrdom, and 70 war wagons bristling with pavizes and bolt-throwers. His eyes narrowed at the far tree line where Lithuanian scouts flickered like shadows. Let them skirmish, he thought. Once my wedge breaks their shaky center, the heathen will scatter, and the Poles will lose their nerve. Between the hosts stretched a gentle basin of grassy heath pocked by boggy puddles, a deceptively ordinary meadow that would, within hours, be immortalized in annals from Krakow to Königsberg. The rising sun set helms glinting, pennons embroidered with eagles, crosses, double columns of red and white fluttered in a cool July breeze. Trumpets called both armies to prayer. Priests in white and black invoked Michael the Archangel for one side, Saints Stanislaw and Mary for the other. Men kissed crucifixes, saintly relics, or leather fetishes of thunder gods. Under every whispered amen loomed a simpler litany. Strike, live, remember. Jagiełło delayed. He let the sun climb, cooking iron and swelling throats with thirst. Some Teutonic knights, swaddled in 30 kilograms of plate, shifted restlessly. Horses stamped at horseflies. At length, the Polish monarch ordered his Lithuanian vanguard forward. Light cavalry, banners tipped with crescents, drums drumming a step-spumming cadence. They galloped in shooting circles before the Teutonic left, loosing shafts that clattered off shields or stuck quivering in wagon sides. Ulrich scowled but held his line. He knew these darts were fleas against plate, distracting at best. Yet the harassment achieved its aim. Dust clouded his flank. Breath rose hot beneath helms. Tempers did the rest. When Ulrich unleashed the first charge, it thundered like metal-shod lightning. 2,000 knights knelt momentarily for blessing, then spurred down slope with lances couched. Hoofbeats drummed, ground quaked. White cloaks billowed behind angular plates that caught sun like mirrors. They smashed into Lithuanian auxiliaries who scattered at the moment of contact, wheeling away in disorderly retreat toward a stand of oaks. Polish infantry cheered until they saw the rout multiply. Tatar horsemen, Ruthenian banners, even units of Lithuanian boyars broke and streamed rearward, their banners dipping like wounded swans. Cries of betrayal surged along the Polish line. Had the Grand Duke Vytautas fled? Were pagan allies deserting for gold? Panic slithered among spearmen as jagged as any blade. Yet Jagiełło's eyes remained cool. The flight was scripted. He had wagered on Ulrich's pride, on his conviction that holy steel could not be misled. Now, as the Teutonic wedge pursued fugitives into churned marsh beyond the oak stand, its perfect point lost coherence. Horse lines tangled in fen ruts. Banners drifted out of trumpet range. Ulrich, still atop the rise, perceived disorder, but believed victory only required deeper thrust. He committed the reserve banners, knights fresh and gleaming, into the same corridor of pursuit. They too pounded downhill, hooves spraying sodden turf. The trap snapped. From behind the oak stand, Lithuanian drums reversed cadence. Boyars reformed on firmer ground while nimble Tatars circled flanks, peppering the pursuing Teutons with barbed arrows. At the same moment, Jagiełło signaled the Polish heavy cavalry massed on the central ridge. Heraldic eagles dipped and rose as 6,000 armored lancers heaved forward. Their war cry, "Krakow, St. Stanisław," rolled like thunder across the field. Polearms lowered. They struck the now turbulent Teutonic center with irresistible momentum, crashing through spear blocks, shattering lances, crumpling pavises. Plate buckled. Horses screamed. Under the press, white cloaks darkened with sweat and spattered soil. What began as measured crusader assault became a maelstrom of iron. Ulrich rode into the melee, blue eyes blazing above a reddening beard. He hacked left and right, rallying brothers with the Black Cross standard clutched in gauntleted fist. But around him, coordination unraveled. Signals lost beneath the din, horns drowned in shrieks, foot soldiers hemmed by surging slabs of cavalry. Where Polish knights clashed head-on, Lithuanian and Tatar riders harried flanks, loosing arrows into visor slits, cutting girths, yanking knights from the saddle before vanishing in clouds of dust. Everywhere the order's disciplined geometry dissolved into bewildered knots of men fighting for breath. afternoon sun turned helmets into ovens. Sweat stung eyes. Water skins lay trampled. Tongues swelled in mouths tasting of iron. Still the lines bucked and heaved. Somewhere in that chaos, a Polish noble named Mszczuj of Skursino leveled his lance at a plume-crested rider in white. The shaft struck squarely. Knight and horse went down. When the dust cleared, Grandmaster Ulrich von Jungingen lay sprawled, throat pierced by a second thrust. The black cross cloak soaked crimson. Word of his fall raced like wildfire. Teutonic banners wavered, some folded. Others fell as standard bearers were cut down. In the rear, Komtur commandants attempted to regroup around the wagon fort, but Jagiełło pressed the advantage. He ordered fresh Masovian banners and Smolensk heavy horse to hammer the faltering line, while infantry with billhooks dragged Teutonic knights to the ground. Surrounded and leaderless, many Germans fought on with grim, almost suicidal valor. Others tried to reach the spiked wagons, only to find them encircled by eager peasants wielding field scythes. The meadow that morning had glittered like a tournament green. By late afternoon, it resembled a smithy floor, strewn with twisted metal and smoking debris. Yet victory's sum was not measured solely in bodies. As Teutonic resistance collapsed, Polish armorers escorted captured standards, over 50 cruciform banners before the king. Jagiełło, mindful of both piety and propaganda, knelt in thankfulness but forbade a wholesale slaughter of prisoners. Ransom would cripple the order's treasury more surely than the sword. As dusk painted clouds russet and gold, singing broke out among Lithuanian pagans and Polish choristers alike, mingling hymns and war shouts in a single rising anthem. Fires lit the horizon, where Teutonic supply wagons burned, their grease-black smoke curling like the end of an epoch. That night, Jagiełło walked the trampled heath in silence, passing heaps of splintered lances and discarded spurs. He paused at the body of Ulrich, covered now by a torn cloak, the Grand Master's face calm in death. For a long moment, the king stared, perhaps seeing the brittle shell of an older medieval order, one that had called crusade against pagan neighbors only to perish at the hands of those baptized same neighbors. At his side, Grand Duke Vytautas, still sheathed in dust and sweat, whispered of sieges to come. Marienburg, Pomerania, the very spine of Teutonic strength. But Jagiełło, ever patient, saw farther. The Commonwealth his marriage had forged, Poland, Lithuania, would rise a regional colossus, stretching from Baltic to Black Sea, a polity of many tongues and faiths. With Grunwald, it had earned its sword. Now it needed law, compromise, vision. Word of the defeat galloped across Europe faster than any heraldry. In the courts of Prague and Paris, bishops murmured that God had chastened a once mighty order grown arrogant. In Brandenburg and the Hanseatic ports, merchants fretted over trade monopolies now imperiled. Pope Gregory XII, embroiled in the Western Schism, weighed appeals from both sides while secretly mourning the blow to Christendom's eastern bulwark. Meanwhile, within Teutonic lands, abbots rallied penitent processions, begging heaven for reprieve against indemnities certain to cripple local economies. The monastic state survived, but its aura of invincibility lay shattered among the broken helms rotting in Grunwald's grass. Along muddy roads from Torun to Vilnius, balladeers soon sang of Jagiełło's fox-swift strategy, of Vytautas's lightning cavalry, of German arrogance humbled. Peasants repeated tales of angelic visions guiding Polish lancers and rivers turning red enough to dye cloth for a century. While embellishment fattened every retelling, the core truth held. On the 15th July 1410, the Teutonic Knights met a defeat so stark, it reversed decades of expansion, birthing a geopolitical tide that would shape Eastern Europe for 200 years. Yet in the king's chancery parchments told a quieter, sterner story. Campaigning stretched weary coffers, nobles clamored for royal favors, border fortresses still bristled with restless garrisons. Jagiełło spent the following winter negotiating truces, bestowing privileges, navigating papal mediation designed to blunt total Teutonic collapse. He walked the razor edge between triumph and overreach, keenly aware that the finest victories are squandered when pride outruns prudence. Even so, every letter sealed with his wax bore a new confidence, a sense that Poland's crown no longer tilted uncertainly upon his brow. It gleamed with the reflected light of Grunwald's fire. Decades later, as chroniclers inked illuminated manuscripts, they struggled to capture why a battlefield among nameless pastures overshadowed grander sieges or bloodier slaughters. They sensed that Grunwald marked more than the collision of armies. It signaled the ascent of coalition over monastic singularity, of diplomacy braided with arms, of Slavic and Baltic voices insisting on equal stake in Christendom's courts. Jagiełło's patient scheme had shown that unity wrought from diversity could outmaneuver the most rigid discipline. On that lesson, future kings, chancellors, and poets would draw vast inspiration. In spring, the meadow greened again. Sparrows nested in splintered lance shafts, and poppies crimsoned the earth above unclaimed bones. Travelers halted to pray beside weathered crosses erected where banners once fluttered. Few could name each fallen knight, Polish or German. Fewer still grasped how those bones nourished a continent's future alignments. Yet the wind that stroked the grasses carried faint echoes of hooves and banners, a whisper that sometimes swelled to thunder when storm clouds rolled from the Baltic. And on summer nights, when moonlit mist pooled over the heath, old men swore they heard armor clinking, as though spectral regiments still sought formation, forever enacting the moment pride met patience and broke upon it. Within cathedral walls of Krakow, tapestries depicting the battle stretched from choir to nave, crimson threads blazing where Teutonic crosses tumbled. Children stared wide-eyed while priests intoned homilies on humility. Merchants haggled beneath those woven scenes, their ledgers busy with new trade privileges won by victory. Universities, funded by confiscated Teutonic rents, blossomed in Krakow and Vilnius, breeding jurists who debated federal union centuries ahead of Europe's rivals. Each book they penned bore silent witness to that July day, ink for which had been mixed with the spent valor of a crusading brotherhood. As years slipped into legend, the order receded from premier crusading power to regional landlord, and the name Grunwald joined Poitiers and Agincourt in any scholar's litany of epoch-shifting clashes. But for the sons and daughters of Poland-Lithuania, it thrummed closer, a heartbeat reminding them that disparate peoples could, at needful hour, speak a single resolve. They would need that memory against Ottoman crescents, against Muscovite ambitions, against myriad storms. And so, each midsummer, bonfires blazed on the heath. Musicians thumped kettle drums in rhythm with hoofbeats once heard, and storytellers spun the saga anew, of a king who stalled for sun to melt steel, of knights who mistook dust for cowardice, of a meadow that bore a nation's crown upon its brow. The centuries turned, empires waxed and waned. In time, modern nations traced bold borders across Eastern Europe, sometimes erasing, sometimes reviving medieval echoes. Yet the ghosts of Grunwald refused burial. Painters of the Romantic Age splashed vast canvases with swirling standards and desperate charges. Poets grasped at metaphors of dawn and redemption. Politicians invoked 1410 whenever foreign boots threatened Polish soil. The battle became more than history. It became a touchstone of identity, proof that unity could fell a seemingly invincible foe, and that courage tempered by strategy could redraw fate. On today's quiet field, tourists tread marked pathways, fingering audio guides while skylarks wheel overhead. Signposts in Polish, Lithuanian, German, and English relate tactical movements and casualty lists. Yet when dusk gathers and the last coaches depart, the heath falls eerily silent. It is then, locals claim, that one truly feels the presence of the past. The hush before lancer hooves, the final prayer of a fallen master, the soft sigh of banners unfurling in eternal wind. History, like those banners, never fully furled. It forever ripples, catching new light in each generation's gaze. Jagiełło could not have foreseen every ripple, but he sensed their possibility. Beneath his patient strategy thrummed a conviction that wars were not merely contests of strength. They were crucibles where nations discovered what they dared to become. On the 15th day of July, in the year 1410, the Polish-Lithuanian coalition dared to become more than shards of territory joined by marriage. It became a story, one too potent to die, and it began on a dew-soaked meadow where two suns rose, the real one above and the metaphorical one glittering off 100,000 shards of steel. When the latter set, it left behind the legend of Grunwald, bright enough to outshine defeat, treachery, and even oblivion. In its glow, the future of Eastern Europe was forged,